Namaste, my friends. Welcome to episode 29 of Jack Colley's Black Book. We're going to continue looking at racism. And it struck me that I kind of questioned the wisdom of this, because sometimes when you disclose something from your past, sometimes people can take it and run with it. And yet at the same time, if I can't acknowledge some of the experiences that I've had in my past, sometimes it might be a little bit more difficult to build an appreciation of maybe the work that I've had to do on myself personally, and hopefully in inspiring other people that you can do the work too. That it's not all lost, that if you can see, for example, how far one person has come, perhaps you can see that there are things in your life that you can change as well. And so I thought to myself, we started with this idea that we have evolved, or we have been created to assess our environments and assess things as being friendly or threatening. And there's all different reasons why we might have to do this. But the idea is this: it is healthy and it is good that we judge, that we make evaluations of our environment, that we are able to take our time, we are able to take things in, we're able to process. All of that is healthy and good that we're able to do that. And that's whether you believe that you were created or whether you believe that we evolved. That has to be a healthy part of living, is to be aware of what's going on in our environment, and to be aware of what's going on inside of us as a result of engaging the environment. The important aspect is this, however: once you identify something that is happening inside of you, the next step is very important. So if you have an experience where you have come into contact with somebody new, somebody who does not look like you, you are going to make a judgment. You're going to evaluate that situation using whatever metrics come to mind. And I'm going to make this argument that that's not your fault. That's just natural. It's just something we naturally do. However, at some point, you are probably making a choice to either ignore the discomfort you're experiencing inside of you, or you're choosing to generalize, or you're choosing just to live in fear, and you're going to continue to generalize for that particular people group instead of really looking at why you're having the feelings that you're having in a certain situation. It really comes down to this: we can make a judgment and we can evaluate something as being something we're familiar with, or something we have to evaluate and consider. Are we going to let this into our lives or not? But at some point, we attach a value to the individual. We attach a value to the environment. We attach a value to this new experience that we've had. And we can choose to live in fear, and we can choose to attach a value that just doesn't seem like it has a lot of merit. It's based on what we've seen online. It's based on what our families have taught us. It's based on, maybe an experience of one individual from a certain person group. But at some point, we attach a value. And I am going to make the argument that it's when you attach that value to an individual that is where you have crossed the line from being humane to inhumane. The idea being that I can look at a person who is different from me, and I can acknowledge that there may be a different culture, different sexual orientation, different way to express gender. All of these differences I can acknowledge. However, when I take that next step and I say, therefore, because that group is not like me, they have less value than I do. They are worth less than me. So when we cross that line to they have lower value, they are worth less than me simply because they are different. Another way of putting it is this: they should stay in their own country. We have our country, they should stay in their country. That really is the same way as saying us and them, worth less. You have this orientation, you look this way, you should stay over there. You kind of get where I'm going with this. It's okay to have those initial valuations of something new. But as soon as you find yourself attaching a value to something, I think that's the time to stop and to intervene and to come up with some ways that you can live in a healthier manner where you're not living in fear and you're not living in, I guess, what I would call ignorance. So it strikes me that it's going to be important as I kind of unpack this to discuss my experience, particularly with racism. And I really question the wisdom behind this, because sometimes when you share things from your past, it can really come back to bite you in the ass. I mean, people can really take it to heart, and they can just run with it, and they can, really demonize you. And yet at the same time, we all have history, and we all have things that we've worked through. We all have things that we have experienced, and we need to accept that those experiences are part of who we are. So I'm going to take what I think is maybe a little bit of a risk, and I'm going to tell you about Jack Colley in the mid-1970s. And I was raised in, I was raised in a racist family. And more succinct, more specifically, my extended family was racist. I don't know that I would consider my mom and dad racist. I think that they were maybe, I think they had their struggles with racism, but I think that they also took a lot of steps to teach me that racism was wrong based on experiences that I had with my extended family. Now, I'm sharing these stories because I got a few stories that I want to share with you. I'm sharing these stories because I hope that maybe there might be other individuals who have had experiences like me, who can say, you know what, I had these same experiences and I never want to talk about them because of the political climate. I mean, who in their right mind would admit to having racist tendencies, even 50, 40 years ago? And yet the reality is we all have grown, hopefully, out of something. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. And I'm going to start with the N-word. And when I first made the connection that this word that a lot of my extended family, particularly my great-grandfather, would use frequently. Ironically, we would get out of church and we would go to Sunday dinner somewhere, usually at somebody's home, and Sunday afternoon football would be playing, and there would be comments, racial slurs being used toward the players. And I remember one, the day that I made this distinct connection was I was at my great-grandfather's house with our extended family. I even want to say it was an Easter Sunday, and I remember laying on the floor, and I was looking up, and the sunlight was coming through the front window of this small ranch home in this town that's about 45 minutes northwest of where I'm at right now. And I remember laying on the ground looking up, and I remember the motes, the little dust motes floating through the lances of sunlight coming through the window. And I remember I was just like blowing into them and blowing them off course. Like I distinctly remember this. And all of a sudden I remember my great-grandfather said, somebody get me my shotgun. And I remember the whole room got quiet. And it was really unsettling because the whole room had gotten quiet. And I looked over at my great-grandfather, and he had his hat on, he had the cigar in his hand was burning, and of course that's what filled the room with blue smoke. And we were all kind of looking at him, and I remember, I think it was one of my aunts said, what's going on, or whatever. And my great-grandfather said, get me my shotgun. There's one of those ends walking down the sidewalk. And I remember people looked out the window, and I remember I got up off the ground and looked out the window, and I had seen an African American man, a black man, walking down the street. This was the first time that I had made a connection with all of these interesting terms that my extended family would throw around, and connecting that with, they were talking about black men in particular. And I remember that connection because I also remember on the way home, my parents, kudos to them. They were doing damage control with my brothers and me. And they were explaining to us how that is not the way we treat people. Those are not terms that we use. They were doing damage control. Now, granted, I know that there are people who are going to say, oh, your parents should have stood up. They should have said something then. And it's like, and I get that argument. I understand where you're coming from. But I also, I want to acknowledge this is the mid 1970s. And keeping in mind that I was from a family of 5, and we lived in a bedroom community. In other words, it was a community where basically people showed up and slept. So it was a bunch of ranch homes in this community, still is. And basically people went there to sleep. And when my brothers and I went to school, we were surrounded by, it was white kids. It was white teachers. There was only one black staff person that I remember, and that was Miss Harvey. And Miss Harvey was my art teacher. And I have a story about her that I'll get to maybe in a couple episodes about how I reconnected with her for the purpose of addressing some of the racism and that continued to linger in me. And so I'm going to keep unpacking this, and I hope that the stories that I tell will help formulate the journey that I've been on. I'm hoping that the stories that I will tell will maybe bring some value into some of the interventions that I have found helpful in having to address some of the racism that I have struggled with, and some of the racism and that was passed down to me through my extended family. So I look forward to the next time. I feel like this is a weird place to stop because I would like to say more about this and not just leave it hanging, but we'll pick up here next time. All right. Namaste, my friends.